Welcome everybody to the newest episode of Voices of Hult here from London. My name is Peter, again, and I like to give a backstory every single time we start an episode. Just like last time where we were struggling with tech or like talking for like hours and hours before recording an episode. This time it was a bit less fortunate because my voice was a bit gone for the past couple of days. So I decided to invite my dear friend Lucia to co-host with me. She's a new addition to the marketing team, and some of you might have seen her around, but some of you might have not. Would you like to just like really briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Lucia. I'm from Spain in the US, and I'm so glad I'm here today. I'm now really excited to be part of this podcast.
Great, good to have you here. And you might be also a bit confused about what's happening because you can only see us, and that's because we're trying out a new camera angle. But we have here on the episode a new really special guest, Alan Newton, an alumni, a Hult alumni, first ever here in London. So welcome.
Thank you. Hello, team.
Hi. Would you like to also introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, so Alan Newton. I'm an alumni, graduated in 2014, and run a business called Virtuall, which is a product innovation company. I'm sure we'll come on to that in a bit more
Of course we will.
But it's really great to be back on campus.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me in.
Did you study on this campus or was it?
No, not this one. It was the one in John Street.
John Street?
Sort of near Holborn.
Oh, wow. Do they still operate that campus?
Yeah, I think that's the sort of postgraduate campus.
Okay, nice.
This is undergraduate only, right?
Yeah, this is only undergraduate, so I know you were a bit confused about like where you should go and like what's happening because you were here 5 years ago.
I think it was about that
5 years
time.
ago.
Yeah, one of the professors, Alessandro Lanteri, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he's based over in Dubai normally. He invited me in to speak to the class. I think it was particularly around fundraising for startups because we've been through a crowdfunding campaign around that time. So that must have been 2016, 17 actually.
Wow, and changed a lot, right?
Yeah.
Ever-changing campus. It changes every single year. I don't know if you realized, but like...
I did a tour before coming to Hult, and the library looked completely different. The meeting rooms look completely different. There's a whole new room, which is like used to be a library, but now it's like a full classroom for 100 people.
Wait, you had a library? We didn't have a library.
We had a library, kind of, yeah.
We still kind of do.
Yeah.
And it's like, it has probably like 100 books in total. And every time I give a campus tour, because I like show people around, they're like, what is this?
Well, I'm a bit of a bibliophile, so you'll have to definitely take me and see that.
Yeah, but we literally have like an unlimited library online. I'm sure you had this as well. Yeah, cool. So let's get to actually discussing you rather than just Hult. So I have divided. I mean, we're gonna get back to Hult as well, but I wanted to divide this kind of podcast into 4 different sections, which is pre-Hult, Hult, post-Hult, and what's coming in the future.
Okay.
So, what was pre-Hult? What brought you to Hult? I know that's kind of like a Pandora's box. Anything you want to tell us?
Well, it's quite interesting because if I think about, I do a lot of personal growth work, and when I think about that, it sort of makes you reflect a lot, particularly when you get to my age. You sort of think right back about the things that shaped you. So if I go right back, I mean, I'm the eldest of 3 boys from Liverpool, very working class family. We had no money. Born in the late 70s, so grew up in the 80s, and that was a really tough time for the city of Liverpool. Sort of went through a lot of mass unemployment and a complete shift in terms of the traditional industries that were in this country. So shipbuilding was big in Liverpool, and obviously a major port, and that changed. So it was an interesting time growing up because we always knew we had no money, but we always had a lot of love, and my parents had sort of made sure that they migrated when I was about age 5 out from inner city to a more suburban area so that we could go to a good school, and that was a good school. So yeah, it was when I've been through a lot of personal growth, you sort of meet people and you hear their stories and think, oh God, I've got no problems compared to what I've just heard. But I did get bullied in high school. Not at infant and junior school, but in high school when there was sort of like a bigger mix, and I was always very slim and skinny. So that was people's reason to sort of bully me. And my dad always went, you got to stand up for yourself. So I did against the biggest bully. He still, sort of beat me up, let's say. But most people who saw that happen and saw me have a go back for, I'm not going to physically challenge him again because we could get embarrassed. So the bullying sort of migrated to being more verbal. And in a way, that becomes psychological. And when I think about the fact at that stage, I was a very confident kid up until high school, and then then my confidence started to wane. And I think I'm naturally an introvert. All the tests I come out like that. And I remember some of my business school classes and some of my classmates were like, "You're not an introvert." You know, when we did these tests and I'd be in one corner of the room, I remember Summit, one of our friends was like, "Alan, stop messing about. Come on, come over here." I'm like, "No, I'm in the right place." So it's quite interesting. So yeah, that was a lot of my sort of early grounding and upbringing, and I think that really created a resilience, and that's sort of why I talk about that, because when we come to sort of entrepreneurialism and certain things in your life and the tests that you have to sort of dig in and really pull on some reserves from somewhere. And I think I just found that being from a tough city, which Liverpool is in those early days, and the fact that we had no money, so you're always just scrapping and finding a way. So, you know, a lot of people do paper rounds when they're kids. There's nothing special about that, but I'd sort of have a morning, an evening and a Sunday. I worked all hours that I could to just try and get a bit of extra cash. I'd go out car washing and try and find other and I'd be pulling my younger brothers along. I used to hate it. But, you know, just getting out there and trying to earn a little bit more money, because even all my mates had more cash than we did. You know, I get like £2 a week off my dad and they get £10.
Oh, wow.
And that even at that age, certainly back then, was like quite a big differential, because they could always say, "Come on, we'll come and do this," and I couldn't, and I'd have to make excuses. And that was a little bit embarrassing at first, but you just sort of got used to it. And then I'd earn my own money and so on. So in a way, that also shaped me in terms of my work ethic very early.
Nice.
You know, that resilience and that work ethic come quite quickly. And then shaping me into sort of career, I always hated injustice. And again, that come from, I guess, a bit of the background of the city, presumably. And I was looking at a lot of the things because I was curious. I started to read more and see what was going on in the world. And I thought about what's the biggest injustice in the world? If we look at discrimination and prejudice and stuff, I went, well, it's half the population, women, who aren't given a fair deal. So I'd gone to university to study law, and my dissertation I decided to focus on basically the stringency of equal pay legislation in the UK and Europe.
Wow.
And essentially come to the conclusion that legislation doesn't really help that much. It actually helps a lot of companies or people that want to do wrong to skirt around the legislation. Certainly what I found through a lot of the studying. And so really come to a conclusion that it has to be a mindset change from a society level whenever we're looking. So it comes back to education.
Yeah.
And that's early education and obviously the places we are now.
Do you still use that knowledge kind of from the law background? What
Yeah,
you do right
I've
now?
used it a fair bit in different elements of my career. I mean, I decided once I studied law, I thought this isn't for me, much to my mum and dad's, consternation. They were like, "Oh, we want you to have a profession."
What about law made you think that it wasn't for you?
Because I'm curious and quite independent and quite free-willed and like to travel and like a lot of diversity. The law just felt too dull and boring for me I'm going to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I always thought, well, I could always come back to it if I'm really interested, but you have to go on after you've studied and do law school for another 3 or 4 years before you even start earning, and it's highly competitive. And I've never had a problem with competition, but I just thought, I've got to be in this, and I've got to be really committed to it, and I wasn't when I come out from studying. So, yeah, I thought I didn't know what I was going to do. And I'd had 3 jobs in my final year of my undergraduate course at university, one of which was in retail for Next, a sort of like mid-level fashion retailer in the UK, if you've come across them. And so I just ended up upping my hours when I come out of university, thinking, right, what am I going to do? And I think I did about 2 years, but they quickly pushed me into a management level. So I was in management positions really, really early, actually, which was quite bizarre because you don't get any training for that. Certainly didn't at the time. But I think a lot of management is common sense and treating people how you'd like to be treated and being a good listener and empathetic. And does that make me a good manager necessarily? No. I think I've learnt a lot down the years in some of the management positions when I fell into the industry that I'm in now, which is essentially hospitality and hotels. I work for 2 of the biggest event management companies in the UK, and that was purely by chance. When I had no airs and graces when I moved in to that role, I sort of went in temporarily because they needed some staff, and they were like, right, you need to help us organise a corporate event by finding venues on behalf of these clients. Here's a list of things you need to ask the hotel, and here's a list of hotels. you literally get on the phone and you were doing that process. And then they said after a couple of weeks, we'd like you to stay. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I thought, well, seems like an interesting area. The office was 90% women, so I quite like that. And there was a lot of travel potentially involved. So I thought, okay, let's see where this goes. And in the end, that's turned into 24 years of working in that industry. Yeah. So it's funny where sort of life takes you when you're not planning, because quite often we tend to plan a lot. Yeah. But it was that absence of a plan that sort of led to actually a really, really fruitful career.
Yeah. I think coming back to management, I think what you mentioned is quite interesting. That you just get thrown in. It's really hard to understand, because like recently I took upon a role in this incubator we have here on campus, Hult Founders Lab.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you motivate those people who do not get paid? It's like, it's students. They do it completely out of their own will. And it's like, what do you give them? Like, do you just pay them in compliments? As like, especially like when you have management and actually working, you actually have that pay, which is quite nice, obviously, that you can motivate them, give them bonuses and stuff like that. But here it's really tough. I don't know, how would you take that look? Because this is genuinely interests me. How would you motivate people like without like some monetary exchange?
It's mission and purpose. As you were talking, that was the first thing that came into my head. Because I did a lot of charity work when I was younger and at university. Did probably 7 or 8 years of work for Oxfam. And, you know, my mum actually went and run an Oxfam shop near to home for 20 odd years, and she was being paid to do that. I said we went for money, so that was something she did do paid. And then my dad had done a whole host of jobs throughout his career and had quite an unfortunate time where he was ill and kept off school when he was really young, and he went to got into a grammar school, which was a big thing, you know, in the early 50s when he went to school, but was pulled out. And so really never got the education that would allow him to go and get a career. So did such a broad mix of things. And he ended up doing a lot of work for Oxfam as well. So like I said, well, you know, I'll come and help you as my parents and whatever you're doing. And it was charitable. And yeah, that is the motivation. I've been around people who are volunteering in charity, and it's about that mission and purpose.
It comes down to passion and caring about a project. Yeah.
Exactly.
And self-development as well.
Self-development, yeah.
I would say a lot of the people at Hult do get into like different projects because they want to, I mean, obviously it's nice to have it on your CV, but like at that time when you're learning so much about how to run technically a company, because what we do is like,
Business.
obviously we give it back to the people through workshops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hey guys, popping in real quick to remind you about the Valentine's Day Disco, the 13th of February. Make sure you sign up on my Hult app.
And make sure to wear your best Valentine's Day outfit, because you're going to personally see me as a Cupid, and I don't know if you can beat that. But back to the podcast. Yeah. So it's kind of nice to have this experience.
Yeah.
And then coming to Hult, how did you find Hult, and what made you actually come here? Because law background, and then obviously you mentioned the hospitality and management.
Good question. Well, I actually found Hult through an Access MBA event. Okay. That sort of come up back out of the blue. So some years before, when I'd been working in the first events company up in the Midlands, so I've only lived in London now, 13, 14 years, I think. 2009 I first come down, so 15 years this year, sorry. Before that, 13 years in the East Midlands, so I haven't been in Liverpool since I was 18. And I'd worked my way up in that company. I think I'd had 3 promotions in that first year, and then it was slower in terms of the sort of promotions after that. But one of the positions I was in, I remember the MD come to me and said, we need to invest in you in I think a more academic sense, and give you sort of more skills outside of what you've learned in terms of management and everything else here. And have you ever thought about an MBA? And I said, I haven't. So he had this consultant come in, and me and the MD and this consultant chatted away. And then when I started to seriously look at it, because then I was tuned into it, they said, you'll have to finance it yourself. And they were underpaying me completely. You know, I'd done some market research. So I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to afford to do this. So it was like one of those things that I got really excited about. And then it was complete deflation quite quickly. So that was that for a number of years. And then I'm quite an avid reader now, but I hadn't been in, and I was as a kid, but in my 20s, I can't remember why, I just wasn't. I think probably too focused on career and partying and whatever else we do when we're in our 20s. And I remember reading what they teach you at Harvard Business School. It was quite a short book.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sort of elements of it where I thought, "Oof, I wouldn't enjoy that," but other elements of like I would. And it sort of just like slowly got into my mind again. And then, I went to this Access MBA event, and I didn't like a lot of the other business schools and the fact that everybody else was like very much from a financial background.
Yeah.
Very different to me and not particularly entrepreneurial. And I'd always wanted my own business at some point. And was sure it would happen. And yeah, going to that Access, I went with I think she was my wife at the time. Yeah, because she was interested in doing an MBA. She was 7 years younger than me. So we decided that we couldn't both afford it and that I'd probably go forward first. And we come across Hult, and I was just blown away, to be quite honest, with everything that they said, what they were trying to do as a challenger institution at that time. And I guess to some extent still are, but also very entrepreneurial in nature and pulling in students from a very diverse background. And I like that diversity. I've had that in hospitality. I've got friends from all over the world, which was always a great thing. But Hult just took that to another level. I think even though I studied here in London, 90%, probably plus, of my classmates were from somewhere else.
I'm curious, what about the Hult program back then called out to you? Because the program has changed in the past 2 years.
I was actually also wondering, because we do a lot of challenge learning.
Now it's all challenges, it's all team-based, it's all build your own project most of the time. And I know the older kids have told me that their program is different. So I'm kind of curious, what was the program like then?
It was fairly similar, actually. It was quite unique for me as having been so long out of education, because I was 21 when I graduated and then hadn't been in education again until I was, I must have been 2012, probably around 34. Don't know, don't make me do the math, but there was quite a lot of a mix of, certainly there was a lot of that team element. And I think that was quite specific to the executive MBA, because we were all already forming teams in work and this. So that was a really big element of every course that would go on, and less of the theory, which actually suits me, because I've never been one really for sitting, even though I like books, sitting there listening to theory all day. It just doesn't go in. We all have different learning styles.
That isn't the case for any Hult student. I think theory makes up so little of what we actually learn here, and obviously application after learning a bit of theory is the best.
It's very hands-on, honestly, which is the way that I personally work. I work with doing things and talking about it and actually putting it into action instead of just reading about it and taking exams.
Yeah, I mean, it actually took me back to law. And I remember the best law module I ever did was actually international law, and it was this really engaging Irish professor, and there was no books. And he said, right, we're just going to talk about stuff in the class, and we'll look at stuff in the newspapers. And because it was international, there was a lot of material, and it was quite political and stuff, so heated discussion, but it allowed us to think and be critical in our thinking, whereas when you're sort of reading a book, you're almost absorbing information. Certainly when I went to school the first time, it was very parrot fashion in terms of learning, which, as I said, my memory's not that good. So I did okay at school, but it was the coursework that always worked well for me. So when I come to Hult, that was a really positive thing in terms of the learning style.
Yeah, and obviously when you start working as well, it's kind of what you do. It's you're going to have a bit of the trainings, but how literally trainings are, they're practical. So
and there would be that encouragement to take what you're learning that week in the platform and implement it if you could in your daily work or whatever, if there were opportunities, because obviously there's different topics and that might not be your role within the company. But that made you think and be more creative and add value to companies a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And while studying at Hult, I know you mentioned Virtuall, and we're going to get to that, and that's exactly what I want to ask about. Is a lot of Hult students do found their own companies while studying. So it's this work-life balance and actually, for example, finding your co-founders and stuff like that. Could you tell us a bit more about Virtuall?
Yeah. So I was working for my second events company when I started at Hult, and is a bigger company than the first one, so they were more global. And I'd gone to them because, again, I couldn't afford the price of Hult, but I really wanted to do it. And this time I was going to find a way to do it. I was completely sold on it. And so I went to them and said, look, I understand that you've part sponsored, some people before to go through an MBA. I was in a senior position, and the company was expanding, going through a lot of change. So I said, would you be willing and open to this? So I got to an agreement with them, and that allowed me to then apply. So yeah, I'd come out of that, and my business partner and I had worked together in previous positions. So like I was his client, and he was on the venue side. So he'd operated and run venues in the city and done consultancy with a lot of venues. And so he come to me with an idea for business, and I remember saying to him sort of years later, why did you come to me? And he said, well, you're one of the few people that I actually thought that I got on well with, and that was intelligent enough, which was a nice thing for him to say, to really understand the problems and that I want to go into business with. And it was funny, that first lunch that we had together and he presented this idea, I was like, oh my God, I've like literally got a business plan for this. It's written down, and there was a lot of crossover. It wasn't exactly the same, but there was a lot of crossover. And the business as it first established was like a marketplace platform, because we have 2 products. And that still exists, but it was going after a really big unicorn in the States that's been around 25 years, legacy technology. The founder is a really lovely first-generation Indian-American, Reggie. And it's a classic entrepreneur story. When he grew that business, he'd grown it, and then I think there was a change in the economy, and he'd had to basically cut 20 jobs and go back to living with his parents. And then he grew the company from there. So a lot of credit to him. But to a lot of people in the industry, it's a swear word, this particular company, because it doesn't solve a circular problem. It sort of like just deals with a problem for corporates. So a lot of the hotels and the venues, just like, that costs us so much time and effort, and it doesn't actually resolve our problems. So we set out really to challenge them, which was like a really big vision. And there's been a diversion of sorts since, in terms of not a complete pivot, but the in terms of our go-to-market and where we found product market fit was with another product, which is called Explore. So the company name is Virtuall, and then we have 2 brands underneath, and 3 brands for a small company. It's quite a lot to manage, actually, but it's sort of just the way things have transitioned and morphed.
Nice. So how do you actually manage that right now after graduating, and how did you manage it before?
Yeah, well, before there weren't 3 brands. So the 3 brands come about during the pandemic and through growth and through success, actually. So we had a lot of success in the hotel space. So the Explore product, just to explain, is a multimedia visual tour. So it allows you to go and tour using video and animation, a curated experience. So it's quite modular. It almost works like a website where you can take your own journey through the experience. You can journey through a hotel. It could be an educational facility if you're thinking about going to one. It could be real estate. So if you're looking to buy property, a whole host of different things. Super yachts is another thing that we're looking at the moment. So through that success, the original company name was called Eventopedia, and that's the platform name. So it's got the name event in it, which then started to pigeonhole as we're only events. And yet we wanted to get into a lot more of these sectors, and we were getting approached about it. So from a pure marketing perspective, we needed to change the way the company was presented. So during the pandemic, we went through a proper brand validation process, and because we had different products and we're a product innovation company, and we might have more products in the future, we said, right, let's have an umbrella name for the company, which is Virtuall. And then we have got the individual product names, and then Explore was a brand that came about at that time as well. So a lot of our focus is more around the Explore brand in terms of our marketing at the moment, because during the pandemic, nobody was booking events. So Eventopedia was hardly any usage. That's really bounced back now as it happens, but there's a lot of competition in that space, and you need to raise a lot of money to really make that work. And we've done a lot of validation. Our model is very different. The UX and the experience are very different. So everything we have in terms of the user base, I think it's about 40,000 a month, is very organic, because we don't do any marketing around it. Then you got major companies like Apple and Microsoft and Boeing, Disney. We sort of see the lists every month in terms of who's using it. But we haven't really monetized it, because a lot of the monetization comes from the hotel side, and their budgets aren't there, and it's very difficult when there's a lot of solutions in the market. There's probably 70 plus marketplaces now, whereas there was probably only 4 or 5 when we first started. That compounds an existing problem, and if you're a hotel looking to buy it's not always obvious who's the best or where you should put your money. So our focus has been where our best product market fit has been with the visual Explore interactive tool.
That sounds great. And kind of you mentioned your co-founder as well, and like you got really lucky with finding the right co-founder, and I assume you guys still work together?
Yeah, it's been 9
Great.
years now. Toby. So we're quite chalk and cheese, actually. We're quite different personalities, but a lot of people say it works very well. And we do. This is the thing about any partnership. You want to understand your weaknesses and where somebody else complements you, and I think we do complement each other very well. We have disagreements, but we'll have... this doesn't sound very humble, but other people describe us both as very decent and fair guys. And I think that helps when, sometimes we have our moments and you have heated discussions, but I'm not the kind of person who loses my temper very easily, and Toby doesn't like conflict anyway. So we sort of navigate and negotiate that and just have really good conversations when we need to work stuff out or come to a consensus. We have since recognised another co-founder who's been working with us on the technical side for the last 8 years anyway, and he's been amazing because like Toby and I don't have that IT or technical product experience, and so what we've learned from James in the 8 years and his business partner Lillian as a product coach has just been so invaluable, and we're in really good hands when it comes to product development because they've been there, done it, and led a lot of innovation in London for 30 odd years. Like James started and ran Agency Mobile, which was really, really nascent as an agency when mobile was nascent, really early in. So they did a lot of really good stuff with like Football Association, with a lot of the big banks. Sony Ericsson, I think, was another one. Nokia, a lot of big clients leading really pioneering innovative projects on mobile. So when it comes to product development and the process, they've really taught us about how you fail quickly internally and what you validate internally before building something. And that's always got to be customer centric. Because a lot of people come into businesses quite like us, quite close to the problem, but you can still make a lot of assumptions and you can go wrong and go off on the wrong path and maybe create something that isn't needed in the market. So we do a lot of rigorous testing with anything we do.
Yeah. Then with co-founders getting along, what you mentioned is like on a personal level, for sure, because you're going to be spending, as you did, like past 9 years, almost 10 years with the person. And it's like, you have to envision your entire life. It's like a relationship at this point.
How do you keep that like work-life balance with him? Like make sure that the social aspect doesn't really intervene with like work.
That's a big one. I just wanted to add before you answer. It's like we founded our company around a year ago with my co-founders, and obviously like it was 5 of us at first, but now it's only 3 of us because obviously we had different visions as well. Actually, Zayn behind the camera was one of the co-founders, and we're still like really, really good friends. We just didn't have the vision, and it's like right now, our personal lives and our professional lives have merged so much that we cannot have a meeting without like half of it talking as friends. And it's tough. Like, how do you do that?
For me, it's fine, partly because of the industries I've been in. So when you're in the events and hospitality industry, the two sort of morph in together. And I think, I met I've mentioned her, so my ex-wife, Jessica, we met through work. So we were at a trade show and she was working, she was a German lady, so she'd just come to the UK and she was working for a big German hotel chain. And actually a lot of people knew us as a couple, and so a lot of that sort of started to morph. She'd post a lot on Facebook about our holidays, and so those kind of two things really mixed together. Now I like to have my life as quite separate and personal, but in some senses I'm also open to sharing personal things to an extent. So with Toby, you work together for that long, you sort of become friends, but we don't do a huge amount socially together. We'll do dinner. I will stay at his house with him and his wife. We both love cricket, and that was one of the early things, is look at where you have shared interests, but we also have very divergent interests. And I'm a massive football fan. He's not really into football at all. We both like rugby and motor racing, but I'm not as passionate about those things as he is, for example. I love boxing, and I'm talking a lot about sport here. And I go to the theatre a lot. And he does like the theatre, and he has said to me a few times, next time you're going, we should go. So yeah, for me, the line's a little bit blurred, and that's fine. And I think actually what I'm seeing with trends with the younger generation, a lot of Gen Z and millennials, is that tends to be okay as well. And particularly if we think about the way the world is building up around us, where there's this blurring of, there's shared workspaces right next to residential space, and then you've got where you'd work out, and you'll do all of those things within like 15 minutes of where you live. So I think sort of like people's mindsets are going that way. Like, you know, if I think back 20 years, certainly when I was growing up, that was very much less so, but I think attitudes have changed in terms of that blurring of the lines. So I never really think of it as an issue or even think too hard about it, to be quite honest. Hence, I'll give a bit of a jumbled answer.
Yeah, of course. And what's your vision now for the future? Because I know we only have like a couple minutes left. What's now? What's coming?
Well, there's a lot coming. I mean, we are moving into other sectors, and the big thing for us is reducing the amount of unnecessary travel that happens. Certainly, if I think about hospitality and the event purchasing area. So we want to grow this business to be a unicorn as well. So we're currently looking for investment to be able to sort of grow the product. So there's a lot in terms of our vision that's quite exciting on the technology side and the utilization of AI, which we've been looking at for a number of years. I remember we went over to Portugal to work directly with Microsoft because we were a partner with them at the time around executing something we wanted to do around AI, and the AI just wasn't there at the time, about 5-6 years ago, but now it really is, which is exciting. So we're looking to advance that and sort of just penetrate new markets. Our biggest market is the USA, but we've had some success in Asia since the pandemic, so it's really looking at how we can grow the company in terms of, you know, the number of people we're employing, but also the product itself. On a personal level, I've wanted to be an author since I was young, and I really committed last year to writing a book, and I'm now being held accountable once a week as part of a mastermind group that a business contact of mine, who's actually in Germany, but a British lady, Raj, started recently. And so we meet weekly on a Tuesday afternoon, and we're all writing something, and we hold each other accountable and say, right, what are we going to do in this next week? So I'm writing a fantasy book series for adults and teenagers, and fantasy in the genre of sort of like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia type of genre. And we'll see where it goes to. I'd love to be published one day, and maybe even for it to be a film if it's any good. So
Great. Now to wrap it up, unless you have any questions.
No, not really. I did not expect the books to be on that genre, to be honest, but I love that. I love the duality. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're like really artistic as well, what you were talking about earlier. I mean, outside of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, some people would describe me that way, others wouldn't. So I know my colleague James would probably not describe me as, I don't know actually. But yeah, I like photographic art, and I know he likes some of the stuff I've done, so yeah. But I've never really seen that as a career. It's just a nice hobby, thing to do. That's a good way to sort of, to your earlier question, is just set work aside and just go and switch off, because that can be difficult.
It's nice to have hobbies.
Yeah, it is.
And we also have a tradition.
Yes.
That kind of like the diary of a CEO, that previous guests leave you a question and you'll have to answer it. And would you like to read it out? It's right here.
Yes, I currently do not have my glasses, but I'll try my best. The question is, if you remove all the institutional affiliations you have, what are the 2 words that describe your identity?
Oof, tough. 2 adjectives. Well, curious. Always been very curious, hence I read a lot. And curiosity killed the cat, so you have to be careful with that. What would the other one be? Helpful. Yeah.
That's good.
Nice.
Always good to be helpful.
Too helpful sometimes for my own good, but yeah.
Great. And I also asked you previously, and then obviously you're prepared.
Yes.
What would be the question you would like to share for the next guest?
So yeah, I was aware of this tradition and sort of had bought the conversation cards, as they're called, from the diary of the CEO sort of last year. And I've never actually used them, but they had a blank one so that you could ask a question. And I don't know if you can see that on camera, but the question I asked would you date you? Would you date yourself, basically?
That's really strong. I see Zane behind the camera being like, oh my gosh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I'm sure the next guest will really enjoy it. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, Lucia, for
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
being
having
here.
me.
And yeah, looking forward to seeing you next time.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.